People, you won't believe what this woman has done. Look, I swear on all that is holy. I'm not the kind of person who picks fights with neighbors. I like my little corner, my peace, my bush growing as fast as I want, and the sound of birds in the morning. It's simple. It's mine. It just seems that tranquility bothers certain people, especially those with a headband in their hair, a planner in their hand, and an ego the size of a stadium. I had just moved into a charming cottage at the foot of the hill. It was small, but it had everything. A beautiful view, and a silence so pleasant that you could even hear your own intestines digesting. A dream. And there I was, newly arrived, feeling like I'd finally found a place to breathe. Until she appeared. The first time I saw the creature was in the most surreal way possible. She descended from a colorful cable car, dressed as if she were opening an ice cream parlor in Miami, holding a pink megaphone and shouting something like, "Welcome to the community's first telephone." I almost spat out the coffee I was drinking. Cable car? Where? Why? Why? It wasn't until I looked up at the sky that the truth hit me. Literally, there was a huge steel cable going over my hut. Not next to it, not next to it, above it. Can you imagine that? You're there, in your pajamas, scratching your belly button on the balcony, and suddenly a lady walks by with her poodle on her lap 5 meters from your roof, looking at you like you're on a Disney gondola. The woman has basically created a big brother in my backyard, without asking, without warning, with absolutely no sense of decency. I thought it was a joke, that it was some temporary event, like Alternative Mobility Week or whatever. I went over, civilized, and asked what was going on. She replied with that, "You're on my turf," peasant smile. She said that the project had been approved by the HOA board, that club of retired tyrants with time to spare, and that the neighborhood aerial tour was an innovative form of community integration. Cute, right? Too bad they forgot to tell me that my house was going to become a tourist attraction. For the first few days, I tried to keep my composure. I ignored the embarrassed smiles of the floating neighbors who walked past my vegetable garden as if they were in a zoo. One even took a selfie with my scarecrow, but when they started throwing little pieces of paper with messages like, "I love your decoration," and "Can I download the music?" then it didn't work. It became personal. And what made me most indignant wasn't even the cable car. It was her audacity. The audacity! She had the nerve to send me a handwritten letter, on recycled paper scented with lavender, asking me to redecorate the upper part of my cabin to create a better visual experience for passengers. I read it 3 times. She wanted me to decorate the roof to please the streetcar passengers, as if my home were a movie set. I was so possessed that I almost ate the paper in the letter. That's when I realized, if I didn't react, I was going to become a permanent tourist attraction. I was going to wake up one day to someone selling popcorn outside the hut. It was time to fight back, but with style. No lawsuits, no confrontation. I wanted her to taste her own poison, so I hatched a plan. If she wanted a cable car experience, great. I was going to give her an experience she wouldn't forget. I took my old sound system, installed camouflaged boxes on the roof, set everything up with a motion sensor, and prepared the most apocalyptic soundtrack possible. The sound of cables snapping, iron twisting, wind howling, and a human scream at the end that would make a fireman run. A masterpiece of sonic terror. And on the first night, people. The cable car passed at exactly 20:43. The cable car was packed with senior citizens with wine in hand and blankets on their legs. When the sensor detected movement, boom! Loudspeakers blasted out the sound of breaking cables. Then the sound of a structure collapsing. The cabin gave a natural sway, because it does. And it was enough for one of the passengers to start shouting, "It's the end! It's the end!" One man tried to jump out of the cabin. There was a grandmother praying aloud. I sat on the balcony, drinking chamomile tea and enjoying the art. The next day, I woke up to 6 notices from the HOA Association, 2 threats of lawsuits, and a formal letter from the Cable Car Safety Board. Yes, apparently that exists now. And you know what I did? I installed an even scarier version, with helicopter sounds, an evacuation warning, and screams in German. Because if we're going to put on a show, let's do it right. On the third day of the noise chaos, the cable car passed empty. The gossip had already spread among the neighborhood's pensioners, and those who still ventured out wore bicycle helmets as if that would protect them from the invented sound tragedy that echoed through the night sky. Some passengers filmed their reactions, but most just prayed that the structure wouldn't collapse. The woman showed up at my door that same day, dressed as if she was going to sue her own shadow. She clapped her hands briefly, quickly, impatiently. When I opened the door, she had her speech ready, memorized, on the tip of her tongue, as if she were giving a PowerPoint presentation in court. "You're disturbing the peaceful use of the structure approved by the association," she said, with the look of someone who thinks a microphone is going to fall from the sky to applaud her. I had to hold back my laughter. The woman was talking as if the cable car was a UNESCO work of art, and my hut was a threat to cultural heritage. I feigned concern, scratched my head, and only replied, "Oh, it's just that there are termites in the roof, so I've installed a sound system to scare them away." She froze. For 3 seconds, she didn't know whether to hold me down, scream, or faint. Then she mumbled something about investigating the committee, turned around, and marched off as if she were going to set off firecrackers at the neighborhood courthouse. The truth is that this had already become my soap opera. It was my reverse reality show. Instead of me watching something, it was my house that became the show. And every sound, every special effect I added was a new episode, a revenge chapter, with a soundtrack worthy of a bad 80s action movie. Every night, I changed the effects. Once, I programmed metallic lightning noises, followed by cable creaks and panicked shouts in Russian. Another time, I made the sounds of a helicopter crashing with a failing walkie-talkie and someone whispering, "It's going to blow." There was a lady who got off the cable car feeling sick. They say she went straight to the emergency room, swearing she felt her soul leaving her body. Of course, the HOA tried to get involved. I received formal notices, printed letters with words like unauthorized noise, antisocial behavior, and the best one of all, sabotaging the psychological integrity of the community. It was like I was invading the neighborhood's mind with sound warfare, and that only gave me more ideas. I set up a makeshift studio in the basement of the hut. I spent days recording new sounds, mixing effects, creating audio tracks that would make Spielberg cry with shame and pride at the same time. I began to synchronize the sounds with the cable car's peak times. And it wasn't enough just to hear the noise of an accident. Now there was a fake evacuation announcement, an airplane fire alarm, and even the sound of a pilot talking desperately, as if he was going to lose control of the cabin. The neighborhood went crazy. And the most delicious thing of all? I was doing absolutely nothing illegal. My speakers were inside my property, the volume respected the maximum decibels allowed, and the HOA had no jurisdiction over creativity. What made it even tastier was when a local channel found out. A reporter showed up here saying he wanted to cover the tension between innovation and privacy in a neighborhood in transition. In other words, he wanted to see the bullshit, film my house, and show the old people running away from the cable car as if it were a scene from the apocalypse. In the article, the woman appeared saying that the intention of the cable car was to promote community unity with panoramic views, and that my behavior was disturbing, theatrical, and childish. Me? I appeared sitting on the balcony, sipping iced tea, with a headset in one ear, calmly saying, "I think people have a right to entertainment." The video went viral. The cable car, once used by 6 people and a cross-eyed dog, became an involuntary tourist attraction. People came from other cities just to hear the phantom collapse. People selling T-shirts with the words, "I flew over hell from the hut and survived." One guy had the cable car tattooed on his back with a speech balloon saying, "It's going to fall." Of course, Every spectacle turns to tragedy one day. The HOA called an emergency meeting. I went along, not out of respect, but because I wanted to see the slow combustion live. The woman was there, as red as a tomato left out in the sun. She read out an entire report, saying that my unauthorized sound installation was endangering the mental and physical health of air ride passengers. Someone coughed with laughter. We propose the temporary suspension of the cable car until the neighborhood regains a sense of security, she declared, as if she had just announced the end of the world. And there, in that instant, was when I realized that I had already won. Even if they tried to punish me, the damage could no longer be erased. The image of the apocalyptic cable car had already stuck to the collective memory of the neighborhood like chewing gum on sneakers. No one went up without looking down out of fear. Every time the cable car passed, someone held their breath. And every time I appeared on the balcony, people looked away. All because of a woman who thought she could walk past my hut as if my life was part of the scenery of her small town. In the week following the climax of the cable car soap opera, things began to take an even sicker turn. Because when someone loses control, their sense of boundaries goes with it. The woman, seeing that the cable car was becoming a laughingstock, decided to double her bet. Instead of canceling the crappy air ride, she decided to revitalize the experience. That was the term used on the new HOA brochure, strategically stuck to my gate with a pink ribbon and the smell of artificial flowers. Inside the envelope was a brochure with words so absurd they seemed to have been written by a shampoo commercial writer. Now, with live narration, ambient music, and sensory experiences. Sensory. People were going to start floating on top of my house with a spa soundtrack and the smell of artificial lavender coming from the cabins, and all this for just a small maintenance fee added to the community fund. Basically, she's created an elevated Uber for narcissistic seniors with delusions of grandeur. And of course, it was all funded out of the pockets of the residents, even those who didn't use it, even those who didn't want it, and especially those who lived underneath this flying metal freak. But she hadn't counted on the side effect of the idea itself. Bored people floating in the sky, wanting to be entertained. The people who boarded were now expecting drama. There were people who boarded with their cell phones recording, hoping to hear the sounds of collapse or catch some new scandal in the cabin. One girl even went live. Let's see if the house screams again today. 300 people watching my balcony in real time. I literally became an attraction. There were people with binoculars, children shouting, "Mom, there he is!" as if I were a panda bear in a zoo. They started throwing paper airplanes with messages on them. One said, "You're a myth." Another just had a drawing of a cable car on fire. Meanwhile, the HOA tried to maintain its pose as a civilized organization. They organized an observation patrol to monitor suspicious sound activity. They rode by on bicycles with reflective vests and whistles around their necks. One of them, Bob, a little man who until then had only been known for looking after the flowers in the communal garden, approached me. He said in an almost ceremonial tone, "We're on the lookout for your interference." I ignored him. I took a sip of my juice, nodded politely, and went back to chopping wood. You could even hear him huffing in frustration as he pedaled back to the noise inspector's HQ. But what nobody expected, not even me, was that things would get completely out of hand when the woman decided to install a VIP cabin on the cable car, a luxury panoramic cabin, according to her, with reinforced windows, background music, and exclusive access for those who paid more. It was like an aerial cabin above my house, and the first passenger on this premium experience was a senior lifestyle influencer with almost 200,000 followers and a podcast about community harmony. He started filming, saying that the view was proof of how light, uplifting, and empathetic urban living can be. Just as he passed over the cabin, the sound system activated a new effect, the sharp creak of metal being torn apart, followed by a dry explosion, and a desperate cry of "Mi segura" in Spanish. The booth shook naturally, as it always did, but the influencer went berserk live. He dropped his cell phone, hit his forehead on the window, and came down crying. Crying. He said he would never step on a moving platform again. That same day, I received an anonymous note in the mail. Crooked lettering, crumpled paper, the smell of geriatric diapers. You've crossed the line. This is emotional terrorism. We're organizing an urgent meeting. The paper came with a biblical quote at the end. On the night of the meeting, I watched from the window. More than 20 people crammed into the community hall, all looking like they were attending a UN meeting on civil war. The woman spoke as if she were being filmed by a serious channel. She made dramatic pauses, quoted statutes, and uttered phrases like, "No one is above collective well-being." One lady even cried and said that she was now afraid to take a shower if she heard a noise coming from the roof. It was turning into a one-sided psychological war theater. Because for me, it was all in good fun. But for her, it was a battle for total control of the narrative. And that's why, the next day, she made the biggest mistake. She had proximity sensors installed on the cable car cables. She claimed it was for safety, but you only had to look at the size of the antennas to know it was something else. The equipment manual was exposed for a second, and there it was. Ambient sound capture and voice recordings for sabotage prevention. She wanted to record what I was doing, what I was saying, what I was breathing. The woman basically installed giant microphones over my house, and she thought it would end well. But, like any megalomaniacal plan with a touch of paranoia, she didn't count on one thing. The sensor captured everything. Absolutely everything. Including the sex life of a couple from the other side of the neighborhood, who decided to spice things up in the winter garden, thinking that no one else used the cable car at night. The audio was leaked onto the HOA's internal network. There was screaming. There was fainting. People wanted to burn the cables. The woman had to give an impromptu press conference apologizing, claiming a technical error. The couple threatened to sue, and the cable car stopped. For the first time since the metal inferno began, it stopped. Of course, she tried to blame me, saying that it was all the result of instability caused by the noise opposition. But this time, nobody believed me, because then it was clear. It wasn't me who crossed the line. It was her, and nothing would be enough to make this woman stop. The cable car was suspended for 3 whole days. 3 days of absolute silence in the sky, as if a ghost had pulled the emergency brake on the universe just to give the neighborhood a breather. The woman, however, didn't stand still. While the cable car slept, she moved. She ran from meeting to meeting, trying to convince the other HOA members that it was all the fault of psychological warfare by an antisocial resident. She used words like sabotage, acoustic terrorism, threat to order. It sounded like she was describing an alien attack, when in reality, she just wanted to justify her own mania for control. What she didn't realize, and this was delightful to see, was that in trying to turn the cable car into a luxury community toy, she had stirred up a hornet's nest of bureaucracy. The town hall was notified. A counselor showed up to investigate complaints about unregulated aerial installations. Even the fire department was called in because, according to rumors, the cable car had no evacuation plan in the event of an electrical failure. An inspector showed up wearing a helmet that looked like something out of a 90s movie and asked where the fire extinguishers were in the cabin. One of the HOA volunteers replied that they used common sense instead of equipment. The guy wrote this down on a clipboard with a pitying expression on his face. The tension reached its peak on a Friday night, when she decided to try one last trick before the system was dismantled for good. She called the community together for the forgiveness flight, a free evening walk with chamomile tea and classical music on the speakers to reunite wounded hearts and restore neighborhood harmony. There was even an online campaign with a crude banner reading "Peace in the Heights." It promised to be a flight of reconciliation, but what happened was a lesson in how the universe loves irony. It rained, but it wasn't a nice rain. It was a biblical storm. Thunder sliced through the sky like blades, and the wind howled as if it had a soul of its own. Even so, some people decided to get on the cable car. Some out of solidarity, others out of morbid curiosity. There was a priest, two ladies in straw hats, and a local YouTuber who made videos about meditating with cats. From inside my hut, watching through the foggy window, I saw the first cable car leave. That's when I realized that she had reconnected the system without even checking the cables. In her eagerness to prove that she was still in charge, she had overridden all the technical recommendations. It was the kind of decision that only seems good when you live in a constant delusion that everything will work out because you planned it. The sound that followed was grotesque, a sharp, metallic snap, followed by a dry creak that sounded like a choked scream from the air itself. The cable car stopped in the middle of the road, at the top, with people inside, and the storm roaring all around. The system crashed, and the cabin's emergency lights came on, creating a scene so cinematic it looked like a lie. There she was, screaming on the floor, running around with a ridiculous umbrella, trying to coordinate the rescue with a megaphone. "Stay calm! The safety protocol is being followed," she shouted. But there was no protocol. There never was. It was all aesthetics and posing. The reality was that she had no idea what to do. A resident who was a retired firefighter took the lead. He took an aluminum ladder, improvised a rope system, and started trying to coordinate the rescue. The people inside the cabin began to pray. One lady fainted. The YouTuber recorded everything, narrating as if it were a Discovery Channel documentary. It took 3 hours to get everyone down. 3 hours of screaming, tension, and crying. When the last one finally came down, wet, shivering, and promising never to go up an escalator again, the truth became impossible to ignore. She had put lives at risk, for ego, for control, out of sheer need to feel like she owned something that wasn't hers. The next day, the town hall interdicted the structure. Red seal, yellow tape, civil liability notice. An official document was stuck to the cable car's main support, written in bold letters, prohibited use, risk to public integrity. She even tried to make a speech in front of the community hall. She tried to argue that everyone had gained from the experience. No one responded. Not a cheer, not even a boo, just silence. Even the neighborhood dogs seemed to have agreed to shut up at that moment. She picked up the megaphone. She got into her noisy electric car. She drove away with the same air of superiority, only this time sunk in a cloud of defeat. Months later, the cable car was dismantled, the cables removed, the rusty structure taken away in an old truck that even seemed to know the shame it was carrying. The land where the base stood became a bed of pumpkins planted by a group of locals who decided it was time to grow something that wouldn't give them a headache. The woman still lives there. She's quieter, more restrained, but always has that look in her eye like she's plotting the next absurd thing. She walks down the street as if she hadn't left the whole neighborhood traumatized. She pretends to be normal. She pretends to be innocent. But people remember. After all, it's not every day that a neighbor builds a cable car over your house and turns your life into an aerial spectacle with an ending worthy of a thriller series. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.